I set down my champagne glass the moment she picked up the microphone. Not because I was surprised. Not because I hadn't seen it coming. I set it down because my hands were starting to shake, and I did not want anyone in that room to see them shake. Not that night. Not in front of her. My daughter was standing across the ballroom in a dress the color of cream, her hair pinned up the way she'd worn it since she was 17, the little gold earrings I'd given her for her college graduation catching the light. She looked beautiful. She looked radiant. She looked like everything I had ever hoped she would become. And she was smiling that smile, the wide, unguarded one she'd had since she was 3 years old, because she didn't know yet. She didn't know what was about to happen. I did. Let me go back to the beginning, because this story matters, and it deserves to be told right. My daughter is 31 years old. She works as a physical therapist at a rehabilitation center outside of Columbus, Ohio. She built that career herself. Every single piece of it, the student loans she paid off ahead of schedule, the overnight shifts she worked while studying for her licensing exam, the apartment she rented with 2 roommates for 4 years so she could save enough to eventually live alone. I watched her do all of it. I watched her do all of it without once complaining, without once asking me for more than I could give. After her father passed, she was 19, a sophomore in college. She called me every Sunday without fail. Not because I asked her to, because she knew I needed it. She met her fiancé at a fundraiser for the rehab center where she works. He was there representing his family's charitable foundation, one of those events where wealthy people write checks and get their photographs taken. My daughter was there as a volunteer coordinator. They ended up at the same table during dinner, and by the end of the night, according to her, they had talked for 3 hours straight without noticing the time. He is a good man. I want to be clear about that. He is kind and attentive, and he looks at my daughter the way her father used to look at me, like she's the only light on in a dark room. I liked him from the first afternoon she brought him home. I made pot roast, and we sat at my kitchen table, and he asked me questions about my life. Real questions, the kind that take listening to ask. He asked about my daughter's father. He didn't look away when I talked about losing him. He has a good heart. This story is not about him. This story is about his mother. She and her husband come from old money, the kind that's been in the family long enough that no one talks about where it came from anymore. They live in a house outside of Dublin, Ohio that I can only describe as a compound. There's a main house and a guest house and a pool house and a tennis court that I doubt anyone has used in years. The first time I visited, I counted 11 rooms on the ground floor alone. I stopped counting after that because it started to feel impolite. His mother is 64 years old. Trim and precise, the kind of woman who wears silk blouses to casual Sunday lunches and refers to people she doesn't like as interesting. She has never once been openly rude to my daughter. That's important to understand. She has never raised her voice. She has never said anything that couldn't, on its own, be explained away. She is far too practiced for that. What she does instead is something quieter and more deliberate. A pause before answering my daughter's questions. An observation about how refreshingly unpretentious my daughter's taste is. A comment at dinner once about how it's admirable that my daughter still rents, because not everyone has the head for real estate at her age. Small things. Small, precise things, each one placed exactly where it would land. My daughter told me about them. She told me the way she tells me everything, carefully and honestly, sitting at my kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She said she didn't want to make a big deal of it. She said she was probably reading too much into it. She said her fiancé didn't notice, and she didn't want to put him in a difficult position. I said nothing. I listened. I poured more tea. But I started paying attention. The engagement party was his mother's idea. She insisted on hosting it, which my daughter thought was generous, and I thought was strategic. It was held at the compound in Dublin on a Saturday evening in late September, one of those perfect fall nights where the air is still warm, but the trees are just beginning to turn. There were about 90 people there, most of them from his family's side business associates, family friends, people whose names I recognized from the business section of the Columbus Dispatch. My side of the guest list was small. My sister and her husband, 2 of my daughter's closest friends from college, her coworker and his wife, and me. I wore my navy dress, the one I bought for my nephew's law school graduation. I thought it was appropriate. I thought I looked fine. His mother greeted me at the door in a pale gold gown and a necklace with stones that caught every light in the room. She kissed my cheek and told me how wonderful it was that I could make it, in the tone of someone thanking a neighbor for returning a package. The evening started well enough. The catering was extraordinary. There was a string quartet on the terrace. His father was warm and funny and spent 20 minutes telling me stories about his son's childhood that made me laugh genuinely. My daughter floated through the room looking happy in a way that made my chest ache. Her fiancé barely left her side. Then came the toasts. His mother tapped her glass at 9 o'clock, just as the caterers were clearing the dessert plates. The room quieted immediately. She has that effect on rooms. She spoke about her son first, the way any mother would. His accomplishments, his character, his kindness. It was all accurate and she delivered it beautifully. People nodded. A few women near the back dabbed their eyes. Then she turned to my daughter. She said she had been so looking forward to welcoming a new member to their family. She said her son had chosen someone genuinely hardworking, someone who had built a modest but meaningful career in the health field. She said she admired people who came from simpler circumstances because it gave them a kind of resilience that couldn't be taught. She paused there. Let that word sit. Simpler circumstances. Then she smiled at my daughter and said, "We're so glad she found her way to us." The room applauded. I watched my daughter's smile do something complicated. It stayed in place. She's too gracious to let it fall entirely, but something behind her eyes changed. I know that face. I have known that face for 31 years. That is the face she makes when something hurts and she has decided not to let it show. Her fiancé put his arm around her. I don't think he understood what had just happened. I set down my champagne glass. I am 63 years old. I taught high school English for 27 years before I retired. I have spoken in front of rooms full of people who didn't want to listen. I am not afraid of a microphone or a crowd or a woman in a gold gown who has spent 64 years mistaking money for merit. I stood up. The room didn't go quiet right away. I had to clear my throat once before his mother's assistant, or whoever the young man was, brought a second microphone to my table. I thanked him. I took a breath. I looked at my daughter first, and then I began. I told them about the summer my daughter was 14, when her father was first diagnosed. I told them about how she started waking up early to make breakfast before school so I wouldn't have to, without anyone asking her to, because she had looked at our situation and assessed what was needed and done it. I told them about the scholarship she applied for on her own, the one that covered half her first year of college, because she had gone online and researched it herself and written the essay herself and never mentioned it to me until the acceptance letter arrived. I told them about the year after her father died, when she worked 30 hours a week at a grocery store while carrying 18 credit hours and still called me every Sunday. I said that my daughter did not come from simpler circumstances. I said that my daughter came from a family that faced hard things and didn't look away from them, and that is not simplicity, that is character. I said the two things are not the same, and I have found that people who confuse them have generally not been asked to demonstrate the difference. The room was very quiet. I wasn't finished. Here is the part I need to explain carefully, because it matters how I came to know what I knew. 3 weeks before the engagement party, my daughter called me on a Tuesday evening, which was unusual. She typically calls on Sundays. She sounded careful, the way she sounds when she's working up to something. She told me that her fiancé's sister, who has never liked my daughter, another story for another time, had said something at a family dinner the previous weekend. The sister had apparently told my daughter, in front of their mother, that she might want to be realistic about the lifestyle she was expecting to marry into, because the family's financial situation was more complicated than it looked from the outside. My daughter asked me what I thought that meant. I told her I wasn't sure. I told her not to worry about it yet. Then I called my sister, who spent 32 years as a financial analyst before she retired, and I told her what I'd heard, and I asked her what she thought it meant. She made some calls of her own. What she found was not a secret. Exactly, in the sense that it was not hidden. It was public record. It simply required someone to go looking. His family's company, the one his father had run, and that his mother still sat on the board of, had been the subject of a state regulatory review 18 months earlier. The review concerned a series of investment accounts managed by the company on behalf of clients, several of whom had filed complaints alleging that their funds had been moved without authorization and that statements they'd been sent did not accurately reflect the state of their accounts. The review had resulted in a settlement. The settlement had included a requirement that the company restructure its compliance department and submit to external audits for 3 years. No criminal charges had been filed. Several clients had signed non-disclosure agreements as part of their individual settlements. The company was still operating. His mother was still on the board. It had been covered, briefly, in the Columbus Business Journal. One article. 17 months ago. That was it. I read that article 4 times before the engagement party. I did not plan to use it. That is the truth. I had brought the article because I am a woman who has learned that information is sometimes the only protection available to people who don't have other kinds of power, and I wanted my daughter to be protected. I had it folded in my evening bag the way you carry an umbrella on a day that might not need one. But then his mother picked up the microphone. So I kept going. I said that I also wanted to take a moment to talk about the concept of resilience, since it had come up. I said that resilience is built through facing genuine difficulty, and I had great respect for it wherever it was found. I said that I had recently been reading about the challenges facing many family businesses in Ohio over the past few years, which I understood could be tremendously stressful, particularly when regulatory matters were involved. I said I had come across an article about his family's company in the Business Journal, and I had found it very informative. I said I thought it took real resilience to navigate something like that and continue moving forward, and that I had a lot of respect for families who faced their difficulties with honesty and grace. I paused. I said I hoped that would continue to be the case. I set the microphone down. I sat back in my chair. I picked up my champagne glass. The silence that followed was the particular kind that happens when everyone in a room understands exactly what was said and exactly what was meant, and no one is certain yet what the appropriate response is. I watched his mother's face go through several expressions very quickly, all of them controlled, all of them failing. My daughter was staring at me across the room. Her hand was over her mouth. Her fiancé was looking at his mother. His father was looking at his plate. Someone near the back of the room, I still don't know who, started to clap. Lightly at first, then a few others joined. By the time the applause reached a reasonable volume, his mother had recovered enough to smile, the way you smile when a tooth has just been knocked loose and you cannot let anyone see you checking. The rest of the evening continued. It had to. The string quartet started playing again. The caterers brought coffee. People found other people to talk to. The usual merciful machinery of social events ground forward. His mother did not speak to me again that night. His father came to find me near the end of the evening, when most of the guests had moved to the terrace. He is a quiet man, more careful than his wife, and he stood beside me for a moment before saying anything. Then he said, "You're very direct." I said, "I'm a mother." He nodded, slowly, the way people nod when they've received an answer they can't argue with but aren't sure they like. He said, "She means well." I said I believed that most people believe that about themselves, and I left it there. My daughter found me by the car at the end of the night. Her fiancé had stayed inside to help his parents say goodbye to the last guests. She stood in front of me in the cool September air and looked at me for a long moment without speaking. Then she said, "How long have you known?" I told her about my sister's calls. I told her about the article. I told her that I hadn't intended to use it and that I had meant every word I'd said about her father and about her. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Did you plan that last part, the part about resilience?" I said, "I found an opening." She laughed then, the kind of laugh that releases something, and she put her arms around me, and I held her the way I held her the night her father died, and the night she got her acceptance letter, and every significant night in between. She is 31 years old, and she is the best thing I have ever done, and no woman in a gold gown was going to stand in a ballroom full of people and make her feel like a charity case without hearing from me. We drove home separately. She called me when she got in, around midnight. She said her fiancé had talked to his mother. She said the conversation had been difficult and long. She said he had not defended what his mother had said. She said he had told his mother directly that he expected her to treat his future wife with respect and that this was not a negotiation. I asked how his mother had responded. She said his mother had said she didn't know what all the fuss was about. I said that sounded about right. She laughed again, softer this time. She said, "Mom, I need to ask you something." I said, "Go ahead." She said, "Are you worried? About the company? About what it means for him?" I thought about that for a moment before I answered. I thought about the young man who had sat at my kitchen table and asked real questions and didn't look away when I talked about grief. I thought about the way he had put his arm around my daughter when his mother finished speaking. I thought about the fact that he had gone to his mother that same night and said what needed to be said. I said, "His family has problems. All families have problems. What matters is whether he faces them honestly or looks the other way." She was quiet for a beat. I said, "He went to his mother tonight, didn't he?" She said yes. I said, "Then you have your answer." She married him the following June. It was a small ceremony, outdoors, at a vineyard about 40 miles east of Columbus. His mother was in attendance. She was civil. She was gracious in the way that people are gracious when they understand the landscape has shifted and the old rules no longer apply. She gave a toast this time, too. It was brief, and it was warm, and she looked at my daughter when she said the word family in a way that felt, if not entirely genuine, at least intentional. I sat in the front row in a rose-colored dress my daughter had helped me pick out. I watched my daughter walk toward the man she loves with her shoulders back and her head up and that wide, unguarded smile she's had since she was 3 years old. I did not cry until the vows, and then I cried the way you cry when something has been earned. After the reception, late in the evening when most of the guests had drifted toward the parking lot, my daughter found me sitting at a table near the edge of the outdoor lights with a glass of wine and my shoes off. She sat down beside me. The vineyard was quiet and the air smelled like late summer and cut grass. She said, "Thank you." I said, "For what?" She said, "For knowing when to stand up." I thought about that for a while after she went back to her husband. I thought about all the years of Sunday phone calls and pot roast and folded napkins and watching her carry things no one should have to carry alone. I thought about her father, who was not there, and about how fiercely he would have loved this night. I thought about the fact that the truth, when you've done the work to find it and you're not afraid to say it out loud, is the only thing that holds its value regardless of the size of the room or the price of the necklace or the number of guest houses on the property. Somebody has to stand up first. Somebody has to believe that the person they love is worth the discomfort of a room going quiet. I am 63 years old. I have been a teacher. I have been a widow. I have been a mother for 31 years. I have sat with students who believed they were not worth fighting for, and I have sat with a daughter who was raised to believe she was, and I can tell you the difference is not circumstance. It is not money or zip code or the size of your mother's necklace. The difference is someone who sets down their champagne glass and stands up. I hope if you are watching this and you have someone you love who is being made small in a room full of people, you will remember that rooms are just rooms, and the people in them are just people. And the truth does not require their permission to exist. You only have to be willing to say it.